Hello, one and all, and welcome to the Super Show podcast, episode number 195, getting ever closer to the big 200. I am your host for this week, Jamie, and joining me, I'm very glad to be able to say, is a bona fide expert in one of the many topics that we have coming up on this week's episode. I thought if we're going to talk about one of the most iconic characters of 1980s American motion pictures, I thought I had to bring in a man who actually, if I had to guess, owns a whip himself, Mr. Alex Jones.
That amazingly, you're not wrong. I do indeed own a whip
I
myself.
knew you would own a whip. Of course you own a whip.
And I own a whip specifically because I was being Indiana Jones for my 21st birthday, which was a fancy dress party, and I dressed up as Indiana Jones. And then I was 21, thought I looked all right, thought I looked pretty good. And then my dad's mate turned up, who was like 35, and this posh pilot guy turned up, and he looked 30 times better than I did as Indiana Jones, and that was it. I just got very drunk, so it was all good. He's
Maybe
a
you
lovely
should spend
bloke.
more on the whip.
I did whip in the garden. I was showing people I could actually do the whippage. I could make it go whoopah.
Cool. Well, I mean, you are the one person I know who, like, in all my years of working with you, would take up hobbies like archery, for one. You would come in on one day of the week and you were either buying a motorcycle or you were getting into archery. So hearing you added a whip at one point to your arsenal is not surprising. I have some questions over the origin story of your whip. I wonder if I asked your wife where it came from, if she would offer the same backstory. But you know what happens in the Alex Jones's bedroom stays in Alex Jones's bedroom, right? Unless you got any grievances you want to air, you know.
Would you be surprised to find out that I also have a nunchuck?
Again, no, it's the least surprising thing. I reckon you have a nunchuck. I reckon, you know those weird ice axe things that you're climbing the ice wall with at the beginning of Modern Warfare 2? I think you own them for no reason. You're never going to go anywhere near an ice wall, but I think you've got those somewhere.
I actually don't, but that is something that now you've said it, I feel it needs to be rectified. I feel like I need that in my life. A couple of them, of course. You can't climb an ice wall with just one.
Yeah, I mean, you got to remember, Jonesy, that you were a guy in the old office we used to work in that set the Guinness World Record for the most number of pockets on a single pair of trousers. Like, they were cargo. I know there are cargo pants and cargo shorts. I know that's a category, but you took it to the nth degree, and I always respected that.
Thanks, mate. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, I hope you out there listening to this very podcast, so maybe even watching this very podcast, also have loads of pockets, because you're going to need all the pockets you can get to fill with gaming goodness. That's exactly what we're here to deliver. And fortunately, the industry has been heating up in recent days, recent weeks, giving us plenty to talk about. So as we hinted at earlier, we are going to be discussing the unveiling. Was that the word we settled on, Jonesy? The unveiling of Machine Games' Indiana Jones project.
I can't really remember now.
We chose
a.
It's just the English language. Who's paying attention?
Revealed. We went revealed.
It was technically a reveal of, as I said, Machine Games, Indiana Jones, and the Great Circle. Obviously, we saw plenty of gameplay from that, so we're gonna let you know our thoughts from the perspective of a fan of Machine Games and from the perspective of a fan of Indiana Jones, one that owns a whip, no less. But of course, there was plenty of other stuff going on, not just in that developer direct courtesy of Xbox, where we also saw some of Avowed, some Hellblade 2, and some of a strategy game whose name I am doomed to forget every time I bring it up. It begins with an A, and that's because it's called Ara, History Untold. But that's not all we're going to be talking about, because, of course, the game that has swept social media in the aftermath of the Indiana Jones fallout is Palworld. Neither of us have played it. I personally don't even want to play it. But if ever there was going to be a week for talking about Palworld and getting into the discourse around plagiarism and AI, Jonesy, it is now. We have a couple of other little snippets that we'll save for the back end of the podcast. But that is the action-packed week we have in store. So thank you all so much for tuning in, whether you're watching us on YouTube, whether you're listening from a major podcasting platform like Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts. If you're doing one of those, you could be doing any of the other ones. Maybe next week's episode, maybe this one, you could break down and listen to the first half on a podcasting platform, watch the second half on YouTube. What you can't do, though, if you're not doing it already, is watch this live, because it's being live streamed out on YouTube. The handle is at SuperShow Pod. If you type that in, you'll probably find it. Jonesy, are there some fine folks in the chat as we speak?
There are indeed. I'd like to give a shout out to the people that have joined us live in the chat on YouTube. I'm talking to Magni, the Funky Penguin, Neil D, and Classy Cat, who are in the chat right now, living it up a storm. So yeah, thank you very much for joining us.
Yes, thank you all so much. And without further ado, Jonesy, I wonder if we do roll back the clocks a little bit to a live stream that, just as a result of how much has happened in games in the past couple of days at least, or at least how much social media activity there has been in the games industry in the last couple of days, feels like it happened weeks ago, but it did in fact only happen last week, and that is that Xbox Developer Direct. And I know people want to hear our thoughts about Indiana Jones. We've got plenty to say about Indiana Jones. But I wonder, just to keep people in the know, Jones, if we just roll through that direct in chronological order, in the order that they went through things, studio to studio, and maybe share any thoughts or opinions you've got on the various other projects that Xbox's first-party studios and one friend of the Xbox family had in store. How does that sound?
That sounds fantastic. Let's do it.
Okay. In that case,
chronologically, it's what I like to hear. It's how I want stuff.
Yeah, it's sensible. Anyone out there who's slightly neurodivergent is so happy right now that we have built a structure around this discussion. A structure that takes us right, Jonesy, into the offices of Obsidian Entertainment, who, of course, as the rest of these studios are, with one exception, are part of the broader Xbox family now and are looking to follow up recent efforts such as... Well, I guess they've been all over the place, right? They've had Pentiment and they've had Grounded and all kinds of stuff like that. But this, a cut more from the Fallout New Vegas and Outer Worlds cloth, is Avowed, a game that we've known about for a little while. It, of course, as we discussed last week, in fact, had that cinematic teaser, that had people licking their lips at the prospect of Obsidian getting to make, quote-unquote, their Skyrim with all the budgetary details that would entail. Then we saw the gameplay, a gameplay trailer for it last year that I think cooled people on it slightly as we got a little bit more of an insight into certainly the art style. And we saw that... Sorry, go for it, yeah.
See, I think, like you say, people called on it. I think that was because... with that first trailer, like, it wasn't exactly, I think, what people were expecting. It wasn't a bad trailer. It wasn't that negative at all. I think it was much more realistic, though, whereas the first time around, I suppose, the promise of Avowed was pretty massive, and then the reality maybe hit for some people, and they were a little bit taken down a peg as to where they thought it was going to be. But still very good. Yeah, still looked fun.
Yeah, well, I was kind of hoping that if that gameplay reveal trailer from last year did act as sort of like a slight dip in the overall hype cycle for Avowed, I was hoping that this presentation, again, 10, 15 minutes, interviews with various members of the dev team, a chance to look at the game from multiple angles, look at the combat, look at the quest design, look at the environments and some of the races and characters they're starting to flesh out. I'd hoped it would be sort of an upwards turn in that trajectory, and I'm not 100% sure it was for me. We got a solid amount of gameplay. There was a decent focus on combat and the way in which players can kind of mix and match spells through wands and melee combat that looks kind of like they've taken that Elder Scrolls-ish formula and tried to elevate it a little bit. Other various forms of magic and even some medium to long range options in the form of even like pistols and sort of would look like almost like firearms and so on and so forth. There's a good variety there, Jonesy, but if we start on the combat, because that will be at least some chunk of the game, I wasn't 100% won over by what they showed, and I wasn't sure why either.
That's interesting. I was kind of like, I was not that interested in Avowed at all. Then we had the gameplay trailer, and then I was even less interested in Avowed. But then watching this stuff, it felt much more tangible, and I thought I quite like what they were doing. I thought it looked pretty good. It looked better than I thought it was going to look. Is that a weird thing to say? Because I think a lot of people were thinking it was going to look great. Maybe it was just me that thought maybe it wasn't going to look quite as good as it did. Because if I remember rightly, that original gameplay trailer we had, it looked ludicrous. Like, it looked insanely good. I think it was
CG, right? So
yeah,
it was just
so.
You were just filling in the blanks with your imagination. Obviously, people were going crazy.
Yes, and then obviously the reality, like we said here, with the gameplay trailer. But no, I think this looked good. I thought the combat looked solid. Like you said, it's very Skyrim, but more modern, not 10, 12, however years old Skyrim is at this point. But no, I'm going to say at this point, it's not it's probably not a game for me anyway. But I think it looked really interesting from where we're at, and yeah, an Obsidian like cuffs off, go mental, Xbox money, do what you want to do game. Still
I don't think it's
sounds
going to be
good.
that though.
No,
I don't
no,
think it's
maybe
going to
not.
be cuffs off, go mental.
No,
And
it's
like,
not, but it's still
look,
good. Still good. Looks like it's going to be good.
yes, I think it will still be better than I thought it looked, and I have more faith in Obsidian and their chops than I do in my ability to rate a game based off 10 minutes of curated gameplay. It's a very lopsided thing that, and I agree with the adjectives you were using. That it is absolutely realistic and it is absolutely tangible, but that was almost the problem. Like I was still hoping or holding out some hope for something a little bit more ambitious.
Right.
Um, I don't think anything that they've chosen to do in any of the design decisions they've made, as it pertains to combat, for one, look wrong or poor. But some of the implementation felt a little bit strange across the board. Like even just little things like, if anyone is curious enough, you can go back and watch it. But like, pay close attention to the ragdoll effects and the way enemies kind of crumple directly downwards in a way that might not be totally unrealistic, but kind of sucked a lot of the energy, especially out of the melee combat for me. And same with the wand combat. When at one point when there are shots of a player character dual wielding wands, and it's kind of it all just felt a little bit kind of light to me. And like when I played the Outer Worlds, and we were getting what people celebrated at the time as a kind of a smaller, more finite Fallout style experience that didn't get lost in Fallout's and often Bethesda's attempts to make something big and sprawling and never ending. I still think Avowed could deliver a lot of that. And it's not going to hinge on whether or not the gameplay or the combat specifically is the funnest iteration of that style of first-person action RPG combat that we've ever played. But I still hope it's good. The other thing I wanted to pick your brain on, though, is we got to see some of the ways they're exploring quest design and what they describe as, quote, moral nuance and grey areas, which, of course, Obsidian, of all developers, can absolutely pat themselves on the back a little bit for exploring grey areas in quest designs and moral nuance. That's absolutely been a feature of many of their more narrative-heavy RPGs over the years. But I did not think the quest that they showed in this gameplay snippet was an example of that at all. For anyone that didn't watch it, you essentially meet a character who was a part of a group of soldiers who I think they basically set up camp and were attacked, and they're all like they basically all scattered and dying. And then you meet another character who was a part of that group, and you have to determine whether or not they were a coward and they ran away and abandoned their group. And it was basically just a quest that boiled down to, hey, get to the point where you've reached the final sort of like chink in the chain, the final point at which the quest can divert in one direction or another. Have a conversation, figure out whether or not you thought this person was a coward. If you accept that their explanation for things, then you get your XP and move on. If you disagree with their explanation for things, you fight them. And it's like, that is how every single side quest in every single Bethesda has ever ended ever. Like, there's nothing new or interesting or morally grey about any of this.
No, it's the problem that they always have is that they try and say we're going to do nuance, we're going to do grey, but all it ends up being is like the opinions of the writers. And if you agree with the writers, you get XP, you do well, and if you don't, you fight. Like, that's kind of how it is to end up being. Like, and because it comes to that point where it's like, are you going to make this decision or are you going to make the right decision? And you're like, well, it's obvious which one you want me to make. Or do I want to chop this person's head off and maybe get a few rubbish things that they drop? I'm don't know. Maybe it's just too hard to actually come up with a proper way to do it. So this is as good as it gets in gaming. Like it's rather like I know that it gets some criticism, and justifiably so. But I think Cyberpunk did moral grey areas and nuance very, very well in a lot of its side quests, and partly a lot of it was because it wasn't really to do with you. It was more like characters having their own little side stories that you kind of can bump into. Whereas this at this point doesn't seem like that. It seems like chop their head off and get something, or get some XP because you made the right choice.
Right, which unfortunately is a familiar quarrel to have to settle in games of these nature. But again, much like the combat, I understand that that was a very slight and edited for time encapsulation of a lot of the probably very broad ideas that Obsidian are going for, and so we would be able to see a lot more of that game's true ambition and size and scope later on this year. I believe that they are looking at a kind of a fall or autumn launch window. I can maybe see that settling in, just before the Christmas rush. Maybe that becomes like a September game. And of course, because we are talking about games that were featured on Xbox's Developer Direct, I think all but one of these, I don't know about that final one for reasons that will be clear when we get to it, but all but one of these will certainly be launching on Game Pass, obviously, and Avowed is one of those. So kind of nice, Jonesy, watching a stream like this, knowing that you don't have that many purchasing decisions to make on the other end of it, assuming you stay subscribed to Game Pass, right?
Oh, it's not even that. It's like you're going to because this was, these games are all coming 2024. So you've got a hell of a 2024 with your Game Pass subscription. Like this is, and it gets to the point where you sort of question, for me, it would have been like, would I pick up Avowed? Do I want that at the moment? Am I, because I'm not typically, a fancy RPG kind of player. But yeah, no, would I get this on Game Pass? Of course I would. And once again, I have to say, we are not paid by Xbox to say that, but we often do say it's the best deal in gaming. It's a very good deal. So what can we say? There you go.
When Xbox's family of studios are churning out like big AAA titles that look like things you would theoretically have paid 60 or 70 pounds for on another platform, and they become a part of a subscription that you were going to pay for anyway, then yes, the value for money does start to feel just very justified. Although the value for money conversation gets a little bit more interesting when you start to talk about smaller scale titles. And it turns out that the game that we saw next is in fact technically going to be one of those, Jonesy, and that is Senua's Saga Hellblade. Senua's Saga Hellblade 2. Hellblade 2.
Is it not Hellblade 2 Senua's Saga? I don't know. I'm at this.
It's Senua's Saga Hellblade 2.
Right.
With
okay.
it, and I think officially, you heard it here first, folks, because I know this has been so controversial over the years. There is a colon. Colon confirmed. Run and go tell your wife, tell your kids. Senua Saga, Hellblade 2. That's what was next, Jonesy. And it was one of those things where, we first saw Hellblade 2 at the Game Awards in 2019. So this is something that we've been waiting for a long time. We knew that because obviously we saw another trailer for it not that long ago, that in fact at the Game Awards 2023, confirming that it would be coming out this year, we didn't know when. We now know, just to get the cat out of the bag earlier, before we kind of break down what we saw, that this is actually coming pretty darn soon. It's coming out on the 21st of May. So, just 4 months or so to wait until we get to play Hellblade 2. Other than that, though, we saw a lot of the game. I don't know that I know that much more about the game as a result of what we saw or what we heard, but at the same time, I kind of don't need to. We saw plenty of gameplay, but a lot of the gameplay we saw again felt curated in the same ways that previous displays of Hellblade 2 gameplay have been. In that it all looks really sharp, it all looks really polished, but they're not. They've held short thus far of showing us like, hey, here's 3 minutes of unbroken combat, so you can tell if the combat functions in the exact same way as it did in its predecessor. Spoiler alert, I think it probably will. We learned a little bit more about the story and Senua being on the trail of some Vikings who have enslaved her people, and it's taking her over to Iceland. And we've learned that she is going to obviously meet a greater variety of not just villainous presences in this game, but also allies. We saw some of those allies and some of the dialogue that the characters will share, and then of course a lot of the psychological elements, for want of a better way of putting it, will be very much present. Although expect a lot of binaural audio, folks. Get your best headphones out and turn the lights off, because you're going to be ASMR'd up to the balls with this one. But I guess, Jonesy, a lot of the chatter for me, and I don't know if you got this feeling when you were watching it live, or whether it all just kind of like came together when we found out a little bit more afterwards. But a lot of the chatter, even during the presentation itself, was reminding people that this is actually going to be a slightly smaller scale. This isn't Ninja Theory going, oh, Senua's Sacrifice was a success, we're going to make a 25-hour Hellblade game that we're set in with mini open worlds and sort of sandbox area. Like, no, this is a sequel to Hellblade that is going to be similar to Hellblade, a very similar length. So we maybe expect something in the 5, 6, 7 hour ballpark. Digital only release, $50 price. Like I said, a lot of the messaging felt like it was about, hey, don't think about this in terms of how many years it's been since you know it existed. Think about this as Ninja Theory are making another Hellblade game in the same way as the original.
Yeah, I think they obviously wanted to get that across because they don't want people. Because I think you're right. Often when you get a sequel to a successful like smaller game, the idea is then you make a much bigger one, and then you really stretch it out, and you give them people much more of that, and you try and you get it up to that full price tag. I think the difference with this is they've really lent into some of the mechanics and some of the way the first game worked, and they've doubled down on all of those things to really get across like Senua, what it's like to be her and experience her world. And like you said, really, really interesting that they sort of spent a decent amount, talking about and getting across the idea of like this. She has psychosis. She now accepts it. She's leaning into it. They've spoken to like professionals to work on like this is how it feels to actually have psychosis, and this is how it, and the way that they try and get you to feel that is by working, as you said, on like the binaural aspect of the game, and not just using like the whispers like they did the first game, but to actually do that with music and with sound and with everything, and to really ramp up that side of the game. I, for one, am totally down with that. Rather than going longer, bigger, drag out the first game to a more expansive world and call it a full price game, to say, hey, we're doing digital only, it's going to be a $50 price tag, but we are going to like polish the hell out of some of the mechanics that we introduced first time round. I think I would really want to see what this game's going to end up looking like. Like I can see why some people may say, wow, that's a lot for a short game, like $50. But when you think like games now are coming out with $100 price tag or just below, for a digital deluxe version, Suicide Squad, looking at you, and when you talk about some other games that are coming out for $70 that are probably not worth it, if you can give me a 6-7 hour game maybe, which really feels like they've put a hell of a lot of work into, as long as I enjoy that journey, I don't think I'm going to be too angry about it.
No, I completely agree. I don't think I'm going to be too mad about it either, especially because, again, if Hellblade 2, hits on a lot of the same themes and ideas as its predecessor did, and I have every reason to believe it will, you probably don't want to spend 12 to 15 hours in that world or with those characters. Because I remember the first one feeling really quite difficult to play through at times, like really kind of oppressive and... Yeah, it's a lot, and sometimes you can make a really powerful, impactful game in 5, 6, 7. We don't know exactly how long it's going to be. They might just be, they might be underselling, over delivering for all we know. We'll find out the specifics in May, I guess. But even if this ends up being like a 6-hour thing, if it's 6 hours of content that's like as jam-packed with quality as I thought parts of Hellblade were, but like you said, with the additional polish that sort of needed to not just represent the fact that this is a sequel and it builds on that original game, but also that it's been in development for a long time and they're a part of the Xbox family now. And that's not me saying, hey, you got bought, so all of your games need to look and feel more expensive. I understand that's not how budgets work, but it would be nice. And I definitely think it is going to look expensive. It's certainly
look phenomenal.
Yeah, the visuals we've seen so far look really, really, really strong. I do. Part of me wonders if I might be slightly disappointed. Like, I haven't played the first Hellblade for a long time. I played it at launch, so coming up on 7 years ago, and I do remember that being like very linear in a way that sometimes you were just basically moving forward through environments. There wasn't much exploration, and that movement, that forward movement, would be broken up by sequences of either combat or puzzle solving, and then every now and then a boss fight. And there would be a part of me if this game ended up being as narrow, for want of a better word,
right,
as its predecessor was, that might disappoint me a little bit. And again, that's not my way of suggesting that it needed to do what other games, even from the Xbox first-party studios, have done in the past, like Gears 5, like Halo Infinite, and say, oh well, now the logical next step is to create open zones or get player freedom in that sense. I'm not asking for that, and I don't think Hellblade needs that. But I would like to see them embrace just a little bit more flexibility and or a little bit more player agency in kind of how we explore and progress through environments, and have the gameplay feel like it's less meted out in a kind of like a walk forward combat, walk forward puzzle, walk forward combat. And there were sequences that were very different in the original game that broke things up nicely. Like I remember some particularly quite scary sequences where do you remember that one bit where you're in an environment that is almost entirely pitch black, and you have to be careful to avoid walking into things that like make noise because there's some kind of blind monster in your vicinity. And I just remember it frightened the pants off me. So I'm sure there are going to be sequences like that break things up, which goes back to, do you remember some of the first gameplay reveals we saw? And they looked like they were hard to get a grasp on because they looked like big cinematic set pieces that you actually didn't control that much. I actually wouldn't mind some of those bits being the things that are thrown in that kind of elevate this a little bit and take it to that, and show where some of that money and some of that time went, I guess.
I think
not that it's a necessity. Yeah.
I think I got the same thing as you. Like I maybe don't think it's going to be. I still think they're going to follow that like quite linear, quite narrow path game, as you've said. However, I think the cinematic stuff, the mocap stuff, the extensive amount of like face capture and like really getting the actors to earn their money, I think that they've done in this, I think is really going to shine through. But so I'm hoping that even though I don't think it's going to necessarily be much wider than the original was and with more for the player to do, I think that there's just going to be more of, from what I've seen anyway, I'm just guessing there's going to be a lot more of those set pieces, of those tense moments. And I think you nailed it for me, actually, as you were saying it. And I thought was if they've made like a phenomenal psychosis simulator, I don't think subjecting people to like 20 hours of it is a great idea anyway. So I think like maybe that's one of the reasons why, because they're like, if we can't subject gamers to this for too long because we may break some. And so maybe that's one of the reasons that they haven't chosen to go that route.
Yeah, a slight spoiler for a discussion we're going to have later on, but I've been playing some of The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered, and I imported my save from the PS4 when I launched the game. And when you launch the save, it tells you kind of like at what point in the game it saved, how many treasures you found, or whatever the wording was, and how long you'd spent playing the game. And I stopped playing that game the second I finished it, pretty much. But my in-game time was like 21 and a half hours. And my first reaction was that game really that long? Did I really spend 21 and a half hours like fucking stabbing people's, necks open and like fucking
that was
ripping out larynxes?
It was long. Maybe. I remember getting through that.
Maybe too long, Jonesy, as it turns out.
Yeah, and do you know what? I remember that it's probably my favorite game of all time, I'm gonna say. However, I do think they could have cut down on some of the filler. Like, I think some of those set pieces are phenomenal, but some of the stuff in between, I'm like, do I need to stab that many necks? Did I need to fight that many fireflies? Did I need to edge around that many buildings and stuff and fall through that many floorboards? Maybe it could have been a few fewer.
There is also something very ironic and funny about you saying that The Last of Us 2 might have been a better product if it had been a bit more vigilant when it came to cutting out certain sequences right after they've released a remaster, where one of the selling points of the remaster is the reintroduction of sequences that were cut during the game. Anyway,
but see, I wouldn't play the whole game again. I think I would just play those bits, or maybe a little bit around them. I think I'd be choosy. I
haven't figured out what I'm doing yet. We'll chat about it in a second, though, because next up on the Developer Direct was a surprise entrance. We knew or suspected that there would be an unannounced fifth game that would enter the ring at some point. We didn't know if it would get shadow dropped, but we were hopeful that there would be some kind of a surprise. And there was. I guess the degree to which it was a pleasant surprise is going to vary from person to person. But Square Enix were the guest developer / publisher that joined the Developer Direct. And following its unveiling in December, we got to see a little bit more about Visions of Mana. And I guess it's worth noting, just as a precursor to any conversation about what Jonesy and I might think about Visions of Mana and how excited we are for it. The Visions series is obviously a very long-running and very well-liked series. But importantly, this is going to be the first entry to ever launch on an Xbox platform which at a time where Phil and the entire Xbox family are trying to improve their relationships, not just with Square Enix but lots of Japanese publishers. I guess it's indicative of the continually improving relationship with the Western Xbox setup and the Western Xbox family and Eastern studios, even if the Japanese audience and the Japanese population still don't have a huge interest in Xbox as a brand. What did you make? Do you have anything to say, I guess, about Visions of Mana? Because it's one of those things that I look at and I'm like, I'm happy for Visions people. I'm not one of them.
Full disclosure, I was running a little behind on the Xbox developer direct, and I may have skipped Visions of Mana, skipped through it quite quickly because I was not overly. It was, do you know what? I looked at it and I was like, oh cool, another Mana game for people who like Mana games, and then I was like, okay, skip, and I didn't actually hang around to watch too much about it. So apologies for fans of the series.
Yeah, I mean, there was a guy who, again, from what I could gather, was an old school kind of Mana, an OG Mana guy. I was more distracted by his jacket than the lower third that was on screen at the time, so I couldn't tell you exactly who he was or how important he was. But he
was
looked.
Was that the one I sent you a picture of?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I paid more attention to that dude as well than I did to what he was talking about, because I was like, this dude looks like the Japanese Fonz. So I took a picture and sent it to you and Chris.
I don't know what he did on the previous Mana games, but I think he must have been involved in the art to a large degree, because a lot of what he was talking about was helping out with the conversion of lots of art and sort of like monsters and characters and things like that were originally drawn in maybe 2D or sprite format that are now becoming 3D for the first time. And also he had a big hand in the creation of what looks like it's going to be kind of like a sort of a dog bear horse hybrid thing that you're going to ride around at some point. I don't know. I haven't played any of the Mana series at all.
Me either.
Like it's just a bit of a blind spot for me. But cool, I'm happy for people who like that series, and I'm happy for people who've been waiting for it to come to Xbox. Right?
Absolutely, me too.
Okay, let's move on then, Jonesy, to a game which I know you've also got so much to say about. And that's because next up we visited Oxide Games. For anyone that didn't know, this was a studio that was formed back in 2013 by former Firaxis team members, so there's some XCOM legacy in there. And they were here to talk about A History Untold, which I think we first heard about maybe a couple of years ago at this point, at least approaching on a couple of years ago. We now know a little bit more about what is kind of a historical grand strategy game, but one that lets you kind of warp or manipulate history or create your own sort of alternate history a little bit, that is going to take kind of influences and elements from real world history, in particular historical figures like Joan of Arc and Genghis Khan, but while you're creating your own alternate history and doing some civilization-esque bullshit. I don't know if Gandhi's in the game, but for example, he would be nuking the shit out of your alternate history if he were.
Yeah, do you know what? This looked like a lot of fun. It looked like a great concept. Again, it's like a genre that I wish I was more into, because I think it's some. I know a lot of people that are like, who love like Civ games and stuff. But no, I think the concept that you can sort of bend history and do things differently is a great concept. They've done a really nice job of it. They're the team behind Civ 5, right? Was that, or some of them was
yeah, no,
right?
Firaxis are Civ and XCOM mostly, I think, at this stage.
So like the
I guess this is going to be more of the 4X civilization side of Firaxis, I'm sure, in terms of what they worked on in the past. Not least of all because if they were founded in 2013, then I want to say they would have barely even had time to work on the XCOM series by the time that was rebooted, because Enemy Unknown came out in 2012. So yeah, we're talking about Civ devs, I think.
Yeah. So obviously their pedigree is there, and they know exactly what they're doing. So hey, maybe this is the time when I actually get into that kind of strategy game and really delve into the history. But you never know.
Yeah. Did you ever play Humankind? Because that was another one that was, again, another studio kind of breaking off and making their own 4X strategy game.
I don't think I
That
did.
was the one.
No.
It was published by Sega, but it came to Game Pass, and I gave it a go, and I didn't dislike it at all. I just like I have with most saves that I start with Civilization nowadays. I just struggle to stick with it, kind of for the duration. But it's interesting to see some other games trying to kind of explore that territory. And
No, I didn't. I didn't play Humankind. I was just
there you go.
checking out. I couldn't remember. I was looking to see if I recognised it, but I'm not. I sometimes like dip my toe into those kind of games to try and try and feel something. Like I really want to get into this.
Yeah.
I used to love I used to love games like oh god, what is it even called? Like Red Alert. Command and Conquer,
Yeah.
like and I used to enjoy like some city builders, but as soon as you get to like the politics and the are you going to go to war, are you going to make an alliance, I'm like, do you know what, I think I'm out. It's too much like the model UN for me. So
I get that. I think I find myself wanting the best of both worlds, where I think I want some parts of it to move very quickly and other parts of it to move more slowly, and some parts I want to be more deep. It's like, as a football fan, I enjoy both Football Manager games and FIFA games, but I sometimes want different things from each one of them, especially if in FIFA you were to look at something like the career mode, which I guess is more comparable with Football Manager's main driving force. And sometimes I'm like, actually, the dream game would be something that kind of streamlined some of Football Manager's more aggressively football-y bullshit and replaced it with some of FIFA's more simulation-y stuff. But that middle ground doesn't really exist. But it is still interesting to see in this particular, in the strategy space, this kind of angling still taking place, especially with Civ 6 now being, again, Civ 6 is going to turn 8 years old this year. And I'm sure there's going to be a Civilization 7 at some point, but until we see that, games like Ara History Untold and Humankind can battle it out in much the same ways, I guess. City Skylines was able to kind of come along and become the de facto city builder because EA completely screwed the pooch with SimCity and made that bizarre, always online, absolutely horribly misjudged SimCity game way back when that they just fucked it. And I'm not saying that that anyone, that 2K or whoever for Firaxis are going to fuck it with Civ 7, but stranger things have happened, eh, Jonesy?
Yeah, I couldn't remember the name of it, but I actually just found the a 4X game that I used to love playing, and it's been a while, which was Masters of Orion, which came out in 1993. So it's been a while, but that was a fantastic 4X game. So maybe this will be my next one. Arya, what's it called?
Ara History Untold.
History Untold.
Master of Orion came out the year I was born.
Oh, well, there you go.
So, oh dear.
I don't think I played it the year it came out. I would have played it a couple of years after. I don't think I was playing it that early. But hey, that was good. That was fun. So you never know.
Yeah, well, apparently, according to Wikipedia, George R.R. Martin used to play it a lot, Jonesy. So you have great company. Do you know what? I don't know much about George R.R. Martin, but if I had to guess, what else I think that man probably likes to a certain degree?
What's that?
Indiana Jones. The legendary film franchise that, of course,
never seen
without beating it. Really?
No,
I know you said you own a whip earlier. I think for that reason and more, I could see you liking it. You should give it a go.
I should, definitely.
I know you should, just carve out a bit of time this weekend and just watch the Indiana Jones films for the first time in your life, Jonesy. Why not?
Oh, I will do. Sounds like a fun time.
Yes. But yeah, speaking of fun times, as we've been looking forward to now for years on this podcast and beyond, Machine Games have, of course, been working on an Indiana Jones project for a little while. We didn't know much about it. We were forewarned that this would be something of an unveiling, a re-revealing, a revealing of the title, and we actually got a good amount of it. Not just the full title, which is Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, as we mentioned earlier. Some idea on the timeline, the fact that it's set between Raiders of the Lost Ark and the Last Crusade. Confirmation that it is hoping to release in this year, 2024. But more important than any of that, Jonesy, we got solid looks at good chunks of gameplay and what the gameplay pillars that Machine Games are hoping to build this title around. And the first thing that probably took us both by surprise was the confirmation that
We got to put our hands up.
we got it wrong.
We got it wrong. Let's put our hands up. Admit we got it wrong.
We got it wrong. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is a predominantly first-person game. Your thoughts on that talking point alone, please, sir.
So we said last week, like, there's no way they're going to make this first person, even though it's machine games, even though that's what they do. We were like, there's no way. And I think you made the spot on observation that as if you would get your hands on a property as hot as Indiana Jones, that needs this kind of reboot, right? Needs some a Harrison Ford sounding Indiana Jones to sort of take that younger character and run with it, especially the state of the films, given the state of the films. And so obviously it's going to be third person because we want to see Indy being Indy. But so what they've kind of seemed to have done, it is first person when you're playing as him. But then when you sort of scaling buildings with your whip or some other set pieces, it's going to pull back and it's going to be third person. So you can actually see what's going on and I suppose get some of that cinematic film, Indiana Jones filmness into it. My reaction to the first person is I don't like it.
Okay.
But then, to be fair, as we watched the game and we watched the footage, I think my brain was in the wrong place. Like, first of all, I'm thinking it's Nathan Drake, it's Uncharted in first person. I don't think that sounds great. But then, as it sort of went on, I think that maybe there was less of a focus on like toe-to-toe combat in this game, and it is more of a no, you can be more stealthy, you can avoid, and they out and out said it. There's a whole sections where you can choose to be sneaky and not get involved. And actually, you know what, that's what Indiana Jones does. He doesn't go in guns blazing in most situations. He is clever, he is sneaky, he tries to like get in by dressing as a Nazi officer and hiding, or dressing as a what do they call them? Not hot air balloon, like a Hindenburg pilot or waiter or whatever in a famous scene to sneak about. He's not there to pull out a machine gun and just like fight everybody. So actually, the first person may work really well. So I'm actually going to reserve judgment on that aspect. However, before I let you go off, I will say the animations of the whip in first person look nasty from what we saw here. Like,
I disagree.
The actual going out was fine. It was like when it hit was fine, but then it does this as it comes back, and I was like, I don't know what's happening. It's like it does a little jiggle wiggle thing before it goes out and before it comes. I don't know what that was.
I mean,
was weird.
It looked like they were trying to create a number of different sort of and as dynamic as possible interactions between the whip and not just objects and environmental elements, but also enemies. So like it looked like you could whip someone at their ankles and kind of trip them up, but then also whipping them in other parts of the body in such a way that might damage them or knock them out in some way. But while also having it be something that you can use to interact with the environment, to make noise, to distract people, while also having it be a traversal tool. It's clear that they wanted the whip to be such a fundamental component of how you interact with that world.
That's great. I love that.
Yeah.
But it's the actual animation of the whip.
I don't think it looked. I think you're being a bit harsh.
Okay, as a professional whippist,
well, that's true.
I didn't like. I don't know. It just looked odd. I'll watch it again. Maybe it was my watching of it was not quite right. But it just looked. I don't know. It looked odd. It looked like it happened too quickly. Like, and again, I wasn't playing it, so I not clicking the button. But it felt like. It looks like it would feel like that when you're in the game, you tap a button and the whip immediately extends like a freaking tongue of a xenomorph in Alien, not the tongue, the little mouth thing, like shoots out directly in front of you. I'm like, how did he get his whip out, unravel it, whip the dude, and then get the whip back? And like, I don't know, man. I remain unconvinced.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, you would know better than I when it comes to the physics of whipping people. I'll leave it at that. But I was more positive on not just the whipping, but maybe the overall presentation than you perhaps were, albeit not having as much Indiana Jones skin in the game as you do. I was a little bit kind of caught off guard when the presentation first started. I think I remember describing it to Chris and yourself as kind of flipping back and forth between going, oh, this wasn't what I expected. But when I kind of look into myself and ask myself what I was expecting, I didn't actually have a good answer.
Right.
Like I was like, actually, the more I think about it, the more they're doing what absolutely makes sense for this franchise and this character. And as you pointed out, like, as spite of Machine Games' long storied history of Nazi slaughtering, Indiana Jones isn't going to walk into a room, at least not that often, with a machine gun and just go mental. He might do every now and then, and maybe we will in the game every now and then. But the fact that it has a slightly more slightly more cautious approach is taken, and stealth seems to be a factor. Obviously, hand-to-hand combat and melee combat is a big factor. Using the whip, as we discussed, a lot of first-person puzzle-solving sequences. I think this is going to be a really puzzle-heavy experience, which is going to be interesting to see whether that works from kind of like a pacing perspective, but also just fundamentally whether or not the puzzles are interesting to do and interesting to solve. Very difficult tightrope to walk. But yeah, it wasn't what I was expecting. There was a part of me that thought that even though it was Machine Games, and even though that in all likelihood they could have done something different, I still had this image in my head of this might just be an Uncharted or a Tomb Raider style third-person action-adventure game with very expensive-looking cinematic set pieces interspersed throughout. And I'm glad it's not that. The more I think about it, the more glad I am. The more glad I am that it's not that. And you know, it's funny. We mentioned something last week. I think kind of off the cut, like just randomly, like a throwaway comment that I've been thinking about a lot in the past week since we saw the gameplay reveal, which is that. Do you know what else was a first-person action game based on a franchise with a very familiar-looking protagonist? That despite being third-person, often went into third-person for cutscenes and traversal, like climbing and crawling through things and doing this, that, and the other.
No.
Chronicles of Riddick: Escape from Butcher Bay. And do you know who developed that?
Ah, okay.
Starbreeze. And do you know where those employees went on to?
Machine Games.
Exactly. There are Butcher Bay employees working on this Indiana Jones game, and Butcher Bay was one of the best examples of all time of like sensibly and like what's a better word than loyally, like accurately adapting a franchise that could have gone balls out and just been a shooter, but wasn't, and had stealth components, and had melee and hand-to-hand combat components, and had long combatless narrative sequences, and had like a weird split between first and third person sequences, depending on what you're doing. Like a lot of what they're doing in this game was weirdly present in Butcher Bay, and that was an iconic title. So just a bit of food for thought, I guess.
What absolutely loved Butcher Bay. I thought it was phenomenal, and it was like you said, it was a very refreshing surprise from what I thought you were going to get from a Richard B. Riddick game, thinking that they would just go ham on. No, you're just going to fight everyone, and then suddenly it was like, no, that's not what Riddick would do. Riddick would pick his way through the shadows, and then he would occasionally interact with someone. And actually, that game out and out didn't want you to fight people one-on-one, and would, like you said, had stealth sections where that would just be like failed state if you did that. No, you're absolutely right. And I will say, by the end of this trailer, and by the end of their little bit where they were talking about the way that the game's going to function, I came away thinking, despite my one criticism, I would say, was how the whip stuff seemed weird to me. But again, that could just be like a wrong reading of what they're trying to put across. By the end, I was like, this is the most Indiana Jones thing I have seen since The Last Crusade. And I was really happy about like the music, the voice acting, the style, like their presentation for like the maps and traveling, the fact that the first person puzzling sounds fantastic. Like I'm so there for that. And then he first look at melee combat where he's doing, because the Indiana Jones punch is iconic, and the sound that the over the top sound effect, like the cracking of the when he. They had all of it, and I was kind of like, oh, okay. I think I did what you said. It was like, what did I think they were going to do? And I saw that, and I was like, looks like a game based on Indiana Jones from people that know Indiana Jones, and who've included stuff that people really like and the antagonist looks fantastic, and some of the little bits they've got where Indy's like buried in his neck in the sand and stuff like this. Just look on point and look like
I
to me, in some respects, some of it looked like they've gone to, and I think they say that you're going to go to Egypt, you're going to go to the jungle, you're going to go, and I was kind of like, have they just watched in all the like first three Indiana Jones films and just taken the coolest locations and said, this is what you're gonna, well, this is where you're gonna be?
I
And I'm
mean,
like, that's such a good, that's what you should do.
yeah, I would be surprised if that was what they were chiefly inspired by. I mean, I saw a lot of sentiment on out there on Twitter, and you would know better than I that that Machine Games look to have understood the Indiana Jones assignment better than some of the recent filmmakers who have had their hands on the project have appeared to have done.
Absolutely. No, I would be surprised. So there's a fella who pops up in multiple Indiana Jones movies as different characters. He is the he's basically would be a brute. I think he was a stuntman on the films, and so he is in Last Crusade. He has a fight with Indy under the wing of a plane. So he's like a Nazi soldier, and they have hand to hand fights, right? Fist fights, and Indy, and he's beating the crap out of Indy, and then Indy manages to beat him up or survive long enough that the guy gets blended by the prop of a plane and just gets like jellified. Right. He's also in Temple of Doom, I believe, as a soldier who's like another brute who is beating up Indy until he gets pulled into a rock crushing machine. I'm pretty sure it's the same actor, and I'm really hoping if they've felt that enough that guy's model will be in the game, like his face will be in the game as like another character, and that to me will be a tell as to whether or not you've got some dyed in the wool true like Indiana Jones super fans making this game, which would just be a nice little touch. So
yeah, I think I might have found him. If I'm not mistaken, there's a guy here who he was credited as Giant Sherpa in Raiders of the Lost Ark, and then went on to be Chief Guard in Temple of Doom, and just Gestapo in The Last Crusade.
Okay, yeah, no, may well be. I don't know who he plays, but that and like
besides Harrison Ford, he's the only actor to appear in all of the first three Indiana Jones films.
Right, and so I would love that if they get that guy's like face model and put.
He is dead.
This. No, he is. Yeah, he is. But
yeah,
they can surely take that from the movie.
Just dig him up.
Dig him up and scan him. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. There is a picture of his grave on Wikipedia, so we know where he's buried, folks. Get your spades, get your shovels.
But you know that. So I'm really happy.
It was esophageal cancer, so hopefully they haven't given him any lines.
I'm guessing not. But I think it's also who does the voice acting for Indy in this?
So it was, as speculated, I believe it has now been confirmed that it is our old pal Troy Baker, the ever flexible, never not working Troy Baker. But to be fair,
mad. He sounds so good.
He does sound great, and I'm not patting myself on the back too much. But you can back me up. I text you and Chris while it was live saying, "Is that Troy Baker?"
And I said, no. I was like, no way. It sounds too good. I was like, it's not that Troy Baker always sounds good, but I thought it sounded too much like Harrison Ford. I thought there'd been shenanigans with some sort of like sound-alikey or AI. I was thinking that there has to be shenanigans behind this, but apparently it's Troy Baker doing a phenomenal impression.
Yeah, Baker himself, I don't think has actually said anything, but Jörg Gustafsson, who is the co-founder of Machine Games and was the game director on this one, he was the guy who kind of introed and outroed Machine Games in this bit. They've confirmed it as Troy Baker, and they said he really brings forward that charm and sense of humor in such a good way. He's also a very, very big Indiana Jones fan, which is super cool. So he's also very invested in the game.
Nice.
So also confirmed you do see him. You see a shot of him in the kind of presentation. I don't know what we're calling it, but Tony Todd, who was of course made famous by Candyman, but recently voiced Venom in Spider-Man 2, is the giant locust who we see as in like kind of like a hooded kind of cloak at one point in the showcase, and Indy kind of runs up to him and he turns around and stands over him ominously. One of the other antagonists alongside, as Jonesy mentioned, Emmerich Voss, the most like fucking like Nazi evil sounding guy on the planet. So overall, a pretty well-rounded and encouraging showcase for again a game which, pleasant surprise, is hopefully coming out before the end of the year. And I know it's always dodgy for when a studio promises you midway through January, our game is coming out this year, believe us. But this looked further along than I thought it might have been. Like, you could have told me this was 3 years away, and I'd have been like, okay, that's a bummer, but I believe you. This didn't look like this looked like a game that could be 12 months away for all we know, 10 months away. Right?
Oh yeah, I think so. I think they showed like a decent. I mean, obviously, the idea of showing the vertical slice is a big thing these days, but this didn't look like that to me. This looked like they had plenty of stuff to pick and choose from, and a lot of and yeah, I can absolutely believe that it's 10 months away.
Yeah, for sure. One to look out for again on Game Pass, and not on PlayStation platforms. When that hopefully drops at the end of the year. I know there are going to be a lot of people. I think, well, actually don't know if this is the case. Maybe I'm not going to say a lot, but there will certainly be some people who will get to the end of the year and will start to see, in an even bigger way than we saw with Starfield, will start to say to themselves, do I need to have a serious conversation about whether or not I'm getting an Xbox? Because the volume of games that I cannot play on the Nintendo platform I enjoy, or the PlayStation platform that I enjoy, is mounting up and will not slow down anytime soon. So it's going to be an interesting couple of years as first-party Xbox efforts continue to strengthen. Any closing thoughts, Jonesy, on the Developer Direct?
Only that I thought it was solid. I thought it was really good. We've had some sort of like, not like maybe lackluster is unfair, but often we say like Xbox need to do something, and not just Xbox, like PlayStation as well. They need to do more with like their first party stuff, or they need to do more with their third party stuff, or they're not really putting enough games out, or da 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 da. This was, for me, was a full of exciting, big. Just not like, obviously they're not releases, but like just more of all of these games, and it lived up to its name. It was Developer Direct. It felt like it was the developers telling us more about their games, giving us more to chew on, and these games are all coming out this year. I don't know, it was great. I thought it was very good. I was pleasantly surprised that I watched it live, even if I was 20 minutes behind.
No, I completely agree. A nice package. Always really cool to see developers give it a bit more time to talk about things rather than having to, cram out a trailer or a vertical slice. And also a nice reminder, I thought, that like while there was technically a surprise in there, as the inclusion of Visions of Mana wasn't, advertised beforehand, it was still a nice reminder that when we're sitting down to watch a live stream like this, a showcase or whatever it ends up being in the future, it's not like our enjoyment isn't contingent on being surprised with announcements that come way out of left field for games that are years away. You can still show us more of a game that we know about and have seen before, but like need to see more of. And I think just between, again, Avowed, which we'd had 2 trailers for up to this point, Indiana Jones, which has already been announced and talked about very openly, and Hellblade, which we'd seen multiple trailers for and gameplay before. Even just sitting down to see more of those 3 games was exciting enough for me. And again, yeah, like a nice reminder that whoever's turn it is next, they don't need to sit down and blow the bloody doors off the showcase with, some, like I said, some way out of left field announcement. Sometimes people just want to see more of the shit they're excited about. So yeah, a strong showing, and exciting to be podcasting in January with legitimate things to be able to talk about, because Lord knows that if we didn't have things like the Developer Direct to talk about, then this podcast really would be on its last legs. And perhaps even more so if it weren't for the love, support, affection of our fine friends over at patreon.com/SuperShow, because that is the place where a number of people have flocked over and seen fit to support us at various tiers and become patrons. What you'll find if you head over to that link, patreon.com/SuperShow, is that you can support us at a number of different tiers, and there are different rewards, whether you want Discord access, whether you want Patreon-exclusive podcasts and videos that we've produced in the past, and still, with a bit of an asterisk, continue to produce, depending on how time allows. Like we did a spoiler cast about Spider-Man 2. for example. That was still kind of recent, right, guys? Patreon.com/SuperShow. A big thank you to everyone who has gone over there and checked out that stuff. There are some names on screen right now of some fine folks that have already gone over and supported, so thank you so much to all of you. But I would also like to give some personal shout-outs to Aaron Cameron, Athletic Gravy, Brimstone, Ice Not Rock Salt, Jesper Cam, Dal Nielsen, Pastors Guild, and then, of course, we have the big dogs. A huge thank you to Brett Z, aka Shellshock, Geometric Potter, Hacksaw Book Read, Manuel Guerrero, and, of course, Peaswad. Thank you all ever so much for your continued support and patronage, and we hope you continue to enjoy the podding.
No, yeah, thank you guys. Thank you to everyone for supporting us. Thank you as well to all the people in the chat who are there saying hello. I'm just going to give a quick shout out to some people I missed earlier because the Mushroom and Rodrigo have joined since I last said anything. So yeah, thank you guys. But no, thank you patrons. Thank you for your continued support. Blimey, if I can even get that word out.
Do you know what? If you flip those two names around and called it Rodrigo and the Mushroom, that sounds like an indie band that I might have liked in 2012 for maybe an hour or so. Yeah. Did you listen to that new record, Rodrigo and the Mushroom? Just dropped. No, I'm more of a Bombay Bicycle Club fan myself. I don't know. I don't know indie music, if that's not clear. What I do know, Jonesy, are video games. And for all the hot new video games that are coming out at the moment, we talked about Prince of Persia last week. If you're the biggest streamer on planet Earth, you may have been playing the new Like a Dragon game this week. But instead, I'm playing a game that came out 4 years ago, baby. The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered dropped on Friday. And if you own the game either digitally or physically, and can prove it, Jonesy, key point for you, by putting a disc in the disc drive, if it is physical, then you can get access to this title for $10 in the US, £10 in the UK, which is a bit of a bummer. It really should be like £8, but who's counting? And so, Jonesy, I've played the first handful of hours of The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered. I don't have a huge amount to say about it that hasn't already been said, because The Last of Us it's on the verge of being the most, were it not for Marvel's Avengers, dare I say, The Last of Us Part 2 would be the most discussed video game in the history of certainly this podcast, maybe even most podcasts. And so I'm not going to bore people with it. Just to say that I'm actually slightly disappointed, having watched the Digital Foundry breakdown of this, especially that so many of the fundamentals of the visual presentation of this remaster, even the word remaster feels generous, are identical to what the game would have been like if you to this day played the PlayStation 4 version of the game on the PlayStation 5 via backwards compatibility. There is, of course, a fidelity mode that lets the game run at native 4K, but I really feel like if you're going to go back and replay The Last of Us for a second time, in people who are in the same situation as myself, then we're doing it to play it at 60 frames a second, because that feels like more of a selling point than pushing more pixels. And in that case, I'm just reminded of the fact that I could have done it at any point in the last, year and a half, and I didn't. And I guess that's on me, but it feels weird. I do think that there may be £10 worth of value or $10 worth of value for anyone who really wants to either replay this game at 4K, or for whatever reason is really not cool with the idea of playing it in backwards compatibility, whatever reason. And someone who really wants to play those lost levels, someone who really wants to play those roguelike modes. Like, fundamentally, there is still a great game to be played here. And someone who I did take the approach of just starting again from 100% from fresh, not even New Game Plus. And I'm like, actually, yeah, this is a game that came out in 2020 that I played through once in about 4 or 5 days and never touched again. And I think when you go through but then spoke about for years, and when you go through such a whirlwind kind of experience with a game, playing 22 hours in a very short period of time and then not touching it again, that I am kind of being reminded of sequences and moments and just watching cutscenes that I haven't seen in 3.5 years and going, cool. Yeah, like that, and unsurprisingly, it's reaffirming like a lot of what I already believed about the fundamental qualities of that game.
Yeah,
but it's also just nice. I will just say, like, playing the game without thinking, like, knowing what's going to happen, without feeling stressed or not worrying about whether or not I'm enjoying it, not worried about whether or not things are going to get spoiled, knowing exactly what's going to happen, and just being able to appreciate the qualities from a more technical perspective. watching a cutscene and knowing I don't need to hang off every word because I understand what's happening, and instead just being able to kind of like think about the dialogue a little bit more, think about the quality of the writing a little bit more, think about the quality of the performances a little bit more, and just kind of drinking some of those elements in a little bit more than you're able to when you're just reacting to something and seeing it for the first time. It's been an interesting experience in that sense.
No, I can imagine. Like, it's funny. I hadn't even thought of it in the sense that you're talking about, and you can play it differently now. Yeah, which is must be a nice thing to sort of sit down and do. It's quite an investment to obviously do it all again to get to that 20-hour mark. But
Well,
no, keen to.
I can't afford Prince of Persia or Like a Dragon until next month. So for the
Might as
next
well.
week plus, I might as well play The Last of Us.
Fair enough.
But unless you've got anything else to fill in the folks at home about, Jonesy, in terms of games, movies, or TV shows, then we might move right along to the game that has been, if not dominating our lives, then certainly dominating the lives of people who spend a chronically worrying amount of time on social media, and that's Palworld. Tell me, Jonesy, when did Palworld first register in your brain? Did you see the name come up and remember it from one of Keeley's shows as like the game with Pokemon but also guns, or was this like something that just hit you out of the blue this week?
Oh, is it that one? I didn't even realize it
Yeah.
was the Pokemon with guns one. Now you
It was
said it, I'm like,
because that's
yeah.
why it did have a little bit of hype rolling into it. Obviously, like there were pre-orders and like there were. I mean, it's still in early access, so there was a game that had kind of been around for a little while. People had
Right.
known about it for a little while.
No, now you say it.
But
Yeah.
I'd forgotten about it basically.
I'd completely forgotten about it. It was so I think it was 2 days ago that my X feed started going crazy with Palworld
Yeah.
then I think it was like yesterday when I started seeing, Palworld does more numbers on Steam than whatever game. Oh, biggest day of on Steam for blah blah blah. And I was like, what is at first I was like, is this rubbish advertising? Like, is it's trying to get you to play some crap game that no one's actually playing? But then I just kept seeing so much of it that I was like, okay, what the hell is this? Pokemon, Final Fantasy kind of like weird mashup sort of game. And then I started seeing all the controversy about it. So that was fun.
And it's kind of created this vicious cycle where the success has fueled the conversation has fueled the digging, and the digging has found the controversy, and the controversy has fueled the discussion has fueled the success. And what do you know? You get a game that seems like a behemoth for a very short amount of time and will probably disappear very quickly. But I will say, Jonesy, as you hinted at, it is already setting records that even if Palworld at this point disappears as quickly as it arrived on the scene, it is now destined to be mentioned, in every breath in which we continue to utter, future record breakers, because it has got right up there. So for anyone that hasn't no idea what we're talking about, Palworld is fundamentally, I think it's like a survival game that kind of has a lot of its roots in games like Rust and Ark, but also riffs on a lot of the ideas of games like Pokemon, wherein you're able to kind of collect and utilize these monsters that all have very kind of chibi, cute, Pokemon-esque designs to them. It launched in early access on Friday. It's predominantly being played on the PC for sale through Steam, but it is also technically a part of Game Pass on the Xbox. I know that version of the game isn't doing quite as well, at least out of the gates, because I want to say it's a little bit more limited in terms of its network abilities and the size of the multiplayer service and so on and so forth. But it started selling like crazy. According to the game developers Pocket Pair, this is probably when you, Jonesy, first started hearing about it. The game exceeded 2 million sales in its first 24 hours. It has now gone on to sell over 5 million copies in only 3 days, which means that this game is like it's selling as quickly as you would expect, the biggest first-party PlayStation or Xbox titles to in terms of speed and time, it's moving as quickly as those games tend to do. Won't have the same legs in all likelihood, but the movement is crazy. And obviously, because it is selling a huge amount of copies in a very finite amount of time, it is unsurprisingly achieving massive numbers of concurrent players. And as of today, it exceeded 1.5 million concurrents, which is the third highest all-time peak in Steam history. That's right. In the history of Steam, the record number of concurrent players currently looks like number one, PUBG, number two, Counter-Strike 2, number three, Palworld. It's also worth noting that if you look at paid games, the only game there included is PUBG. So it's been number two in terms of the paid concurrent all-time peak to PUBG for some time. But only today did it overtake. I think a couple of it overtook two games today, like Dota 2 and maybe I can't remember. I'm not going to guess, but that's what I mean when I say Jonesy. Even if Palworld disappears in a flash at this point, we will now have to talk about it every time we talk about future games. Ranking on the all-time peak for concurrent players in Steam's history, because Palworld is now in that conversation and can't be removed from it.
Yeah,
Crazy as it sounds.
It is kind of crazy to think that for years to come, any list made around like the top concurrent games, Palworld. Although maybe we're being unfair. Maybe Palworld is going to have legs for days, and it's just going to keep on running. I would just for interest. I hadn't looked. I was just checking out how much it is. So it is on introductory offer at the moment, and it is $22.49 to get your hands on Palworld. But that is crazy that it's done so well.
Because as well, like I saw some positive feedback around the same time that you did on X. People who were playing it, who clearly had had their eye on it for a little while, going, "Oh, this is actually funner than I thought it would be." But the idea that 5 million people were ready to roll up, open Steam on the weekend, and say, "I'm going to drop 22 quid in this game just for the sake of it," like it did kind of blindside me a little bit. Because normally when we're talking about success stories like these, I don't know. It just feels like there's a little bit more either build up to it or a little bit more reasoning for it to happen. But clearly something about this has struck a chord with audiences and really kind of whet people's appetites. And before we get to the controversy, I will just say it doesn't seem like there's anything malicious or bad about the game itself. It seems like people, in a lot of cases, are being surprised by how good a time they are having with it. I haven't actually spoken firsthand to anyone that's played this game. No, I haven't played it myself, so I can't speak to that. But it doesn't seem like it's doing anything wrong. So I'm surprised by this. But there's a part of me that, were this the beginning and end of the story, would just say, yeah, like fair play to Pocket Pair is the name of the developer. I hope that they are richer than they ever imagined they would be in their lives, and are gonna run off into the sunset. But unfortunately, you and I both know, Jonesy, that's not where the story ends. Do you want to get into the controversies now, or do you have any other kind of thoughts about, the game itself and the success it's seen?
No, I'm not surprised at the success it's seen, but I think in some respects the controversy and the success kind of go hand in hand. And I don't mean in the sense that we already talked about, which is that the controversy fuels the news stories, and the news stories get it out there, and it's almost like, there's no such thing as bad press, right? I don't think it's that necessarily. I think one of the things, the controversial side of it, that we're going to talk about is its similarity to Pokemon, and I think in some respects it's doing, to me anyway, it seems like it's doing very well, because Pokemon and the characters associated with the game are very heavily protected usually, and it seems like someone's managed to get through a chink in that armor, put out a game that probably, I mean, we'll get into it, but it's questionable about whether or not it's stepping on Pokemon's toes. And I wonder if a big part of its success is people saying, "Oh, you can get the Pokemon clone with guns and it's only £22." I wonder if there's a part of that which is why it's doing so well.
Yeah, especially at a time where, and not to get too ahead of ourselves, there are large portions of the kind of the audience for Pokemon games who believe that the Pokemon formula and recent attempts to broaden the Pokemon game scope have failed, and that series has become a little bit stagnant. If you were to wait for a time such as now, where where Game Freak and the Pokemon as a series attempts to engage with a bigger, broader, more open world kind of game design philosophy have largely failed by most accounts, or by a lot of accounts, and all of a sudden you're presenting a very big, open-ended, open-world survival game with Pokemon elements. Not a bad time to kind of like piggyback off the series Misfortunes, and like you said, also a series that has notoriously been quite difficult to ape. But that is kind of where you kind of we get towards the elephant in the room. Well, one of two elephants in the room, but we'll address the more obvious one first of all. The elephant that's standing in front of a slightly smaller elephant in the corner of the room. Because the game has obviously been noted, and we have just noted on its lot similarities to the Pokemon formula, lots of riffs on the Pokemon formula, but also designs that are very reminiscent of Pokemon-esque designs. And again, there's a huge gray area here where it's like, to what extent is it looking at Pokemon as just the creation of likable or attractive or cute pocket-sized monsters and just done its own interpretation of that? To what extent has it actually plagiarized something? Those elements are still being debated, and we'll discuss that a little bit further. Lots of people have pointed out that things like Digimon exist. You can create your own small monsters if you want to, absolutely. But what you can't obviously do is steal the work of other developers. Whether or not that has happened has yet to be proven with concrete evidence. But those plagiarism concerns have been put in front of the developer Pocket Pair. They've said they have, quote, no intention of being found legally at fault for any similarity between it and any other popular Pocket Monster franchise. Quote, we make our games very seriously, and we have absolutely no intention of infringing upon the intellectual property of other companies. However, as I just kind of hinted at, lots of users on X are already looking through the models found within Palworld. Some of them are overlaying them with models that are found within Scarlet and Violet, and are finding that some of those models, in terms of proportions, are almost identical. That when you kind of take a wireframe version of a certain Pokemon's model and overlay it with a monster found within Palworld, they're identical to the point where it simply could not happen. Like, the chances of it happening accidentally, given how identical they are in almost all ways, in almost all facets, is simply impossible. And obviously, then you get into a weird situation where, is it a developer going rogue because they were running behind? Is this something that was known about or acknowledged or recommended from a company perspective? What are the and it gets into a whole mess that we can't even begin to untangle yet, because this evidence has not been presented yet in a concrete fashion from someone who's willing to put, they're kind of willing to not testify in court, for fuck's sake. I'm not getting that serious, but you know what I mean. Like, anonymous Twitter accusations will continue to be anonymous Twitter accusations, no matter how much of work that individual has seen to put in to those accusations. And so, Jonesy, we exist at the moment on the plagiarism issue to exist in a weird grey area where does the line get drawn between paying homage to or riffing on an idea that exists somewhere else? How do you prove where actual like visible and demonstrable plagiarism has taken place? How do we prove if models have been stolen? How do you know if those are incidents are isolated or widespread? It becomes really tricky, right?
Yeah, it's horrendous. Like, I mean, as you said, like, the Pocket Monster thing has been done so many times since I don't know even if Pokemon did it first, but so I've got two young kids, and the number of TV shows that they don't watch that much anymore, but the number of TV shows that they watch with Pocket Monsters is like upwards of like 5 to 10, where it's basically exactly the same as Pokemon, from the Pocket Monster aspect. So I don't think there's anything surprising about that. But when it comes to this game, I think the thing that is surprising is when we originally saw this back, and I'd forgotten about on whatever Jeff Keighley show it was, I think we said then, like, geez, they've just ripped off Pokemon. Like, this isn't even a question. Like, it did look like Pokemon would have just been maybe made different colors and put into this game. And I think the thing that people are pushing back on now with this is, I think, as you've said, is it's not that they've been inspired by Pokemon. It's not that they've used the Pocket Monster idea. It's the fact that it seems that they may have just ripped off actual Pokemon, which is that, like, inspiration, imitation, all of that stuff is in creative endeavors, I think, is fine. I think it does get a bit dicey when you get, and it's too close. But when you're talking about just stealing other developers' work for the sake of potentially, what we're talking, $110 million that this game may have made in 4 or 5 days is like, you can't do that. And where does it end up? I think you said, like, it ends up in a courtroom with a judge and experts saying, no, this is not this is not like a, oh, my so and so was inspired by their pet chow chow or whatever. It's
Right.
no. It's you nicked this. You've taken this
Yes.
and tried to sell it as your own.
And Lord knows if Nintendo themselves wish to get involved in this, there will be no hesitation whatsoever for litigation to be mentioned. Like Nintendo are
Yeah.
the most litigation forward company, perhaps in the entire video game industry. And so it'd be interesting to see how they respond to this, whether it's well, and how it will be on their radar, but how in their radar it is, and how they're choosing to respond. Because you're right, it's a very difficult one because the thing that feels different about Palworld compared to say Digimon is you watch Palworld trailers or gameplay and you see a monster within Palworld and you go, "Oh, that's that Pokemon."
Yep.
They've adjusted it and twisted it and like reworked it, but you go like, "Oh, that started life as that Pokemon." And I guess the weird thing is, if let's say the allegations of actual plagiarism or stolen work or assets and models being reused from existing Pokemon products, let's say those allegations don't hold any water, and it is just the kind of like the visual inspiration taken to a worrying degree. Like, how do you police something like this, and where do you think? Like, I'm not asking you to become a copyright lawyer for the sake of this podcast, but if you could, that would be great. Like, is that as difficult as it sounds, even for the people who are paid big bucks to deal with these kind of issues?
Yeah, like it must be like the most common one we hear about is music, right? Is someone says,
Right.
"Oh, my dad made a song and now I own his estate and you've used a riff that he used and you've ripped it off." And then you get these back and forward legal battles in court where you've got like Ed Sheeran, I know has been through it at
Yeah.
one point, where he's trying to say, no, it's these four chords that are really widely used and I use them in this way, and and then they bring
Remember
out,
that.
okay, it may be the chords but the production's done the same. And then you always, at some point, someone always brings up like, well, you've got cowbell in yours and the cowbell was in the original. Why would you have used cow? Like, I think it's going to get to that point. I think it's going to be like, he's got a dangly bit under his neck and it's blue, and yours has got a dangly bit under its neck and it's blue, and it's going to end up being this like arguing the nuance about everything, and it's going to be experts in design and graphic design and animation and illustration that if it does get to that point, they're going to be the ones who have to sort of come out and decide. I do think so. Just to sort of mirror what you were saying, in chat, Rodrigo's saying that like they were watching some of the stuff from this game, and one of their friends who'd never seen them before immediately named two Pokemon that two Palworld creatures looked exactly like. And I think that's the thing that is going to make that's going to make this interesting, is that this isn't like Digimon. This isn't like oh god, I can't remember what they're called. I've even played the game. Like,
Yeah, I remember you streamed one of them on the Switch.
Yeah, but oh god, but my kids will hate me for this because they absolutely love them and they talk about them all the time, and they've even got the little toys. What are they bloody called? Bakugan. They're not like Bakugan.
Yokai Watch.
Because like Bakugan, for example, as an example, has pocket monsters. When they're fighting, they're big and they're massive and they fight each other. And when they're not, they shrink down to little pocket monsters, and you can put them in your pocket. They look like mini Transformer dinosaurs and tigers and stuff. You would never confuse them with a Pokemon. But these ones look exactly like, not all of them, but some of them look exactly like a Pokemon. And it's weird because the other aspects of the game, and this maybe makes it even worse, or maybe not, maybe it makes it slightly better. The people in the game and the environments in the game don't. They look like a kind of a run-of-the-mill like RPG. They're more like Final Fantasy, or they're more like that type of style. So
with
then,
assets that might have been bought from an asset store, maybe.
yes.
I don't know.
Whereas then you have these cartoony animated pokey creatures that just stand out. So someone's getting sued, man.
Someone is definitely getting sued. And I'll be honest, Jonesy, we talked earlier about the smaller elephant that's standing behind the big elephant. I've got a feeling that the longer this goes on, the more the two elephants might start to switch places, because there are two other things going on in this story when you dig a little bit deeper, and neither of them look particularly flattering for Pocket Pair. One of them has to do with AI, and the other one has to do with the studio itself and the studio's makeup. I suppose if we start with AI, because this is, again, is a bit of a tricky one to discuss, because there's nothing concrete here that you can look at Palworld and say they've done nothing fucked up. And even if AI was a factor in Palworld, it would simply be something that was unpopular rather than something that was, infringing copyright or illegal or whatever. AI has uh, been an element of the work that this developer has done previously. They released a title in the past called AI Art Imposter, which is a game that utilized an AI image generator as one of its core mechanics. There have also been a lot of historical posts on X or Twitter from the CEO of the company. He's called Takuro Mizobe. I hopefully didn't butcher that pronunciation, but he's talked a lot about AI and has praised the potential of AI and AI image generators in the past. In fact, there was a post that he made on Twitter in 2022 that discussed how he believed generative AI tools could one day be sophisticated enough to avoid copyright issues. A pretty damning quote to have on the
Not
record
yet.
should something like this go to court. Also more damning, and even more damning, is a post from 2021 where Mizobe literally showed how AI could be used to generate new Pokemon designs. How if you taught a model based on existing Pokemon, then you could use AI to come up with new Pokemon models, but new Pokemon designs, but obviously with a model that was taught solely on existing Pokemon. So it would be built out of, you can say, building blocks of Pokemon. Now, Jonesy, there's no evidence, hard or otherwise, that Pocket Pair have used AI to create new monster designs. But again, it opens up a fascinating conversation where you've got the unpopularity of AI art as it exists in the social media sphere at the moment because people want to support artists and want artists getting paid. We've all seen X threads where AI art is being shit on and the practice of creating AI art is drawn into question. We've all seen those. That conversation continues to exist. You've then got, once again, though, the potential copyright issues of AI models that are taught exclusively or fed exclusively copyrighted images or copyrighted designs or designs of monsters from a copyrighted piece of work, whatever, to then it's again so many shades of grey. But you're one of the more knowledgeable people in my circle, at least, when it comes to AI. Where does this argument sit in the broader Palworld discussion for you, based on what we know at the moment and what we don't, I guess?
So I think there's a couple of elements that could actually, and this could be really interesting when we're talking about AI. So AI has a problem at the moment because, for example, like OpenAI are, I don't know if it's actually happening at the moment or will be happening soon, but they're being sued by some people at the moment for illegally using their material in order to train ChatGPT, for example. And it's not just them, it's a whole bunch of other AI companies that are developing LLMs. And the idea is that it's actually not legal to use text that you've written to train an LLM, because that is tantamount to, then I suppose you're sort of feeding all of your information into it, and then the AI is just going to chop it all up and use it. So it is like a copyright machine, right? Whereas I think what a lot of those AI developers want you to think is, no, it's almost like we're showing our AI child your words or your pictures, and they're just looking at it and going, oh, that's pretty, and they're learning like a human would learn, which is obviously not true. Like, that's not how machine learning works. That's not how token predictive LLMs and things and image systems work. They are regurgitating like what they've seen before, but just with a whole bunch of other stuff thrown in. And what I find really interesting about this is there's potential that that Pocket Pair didn't mean to infringe the copyright for these Pokemon characters, but they had trained, as you said, they trained a system in order to create new Pokemon characters. But actually what it did was, it did probably created a whole load of them for them, and they thought that, oh, these look great, and that they were removed enough from Pokemon that they weren't violating any copyright. But it would be really interesting if it turned out that actually it also spat out some extremely similar Pokemon due to the way that it was trained, and that those were similar enough that they were breaching copyright. And so you could end up with a wider impact of this, which says, no, like, AI is, if you feed stuff into it, then that is copyright infringement. Like Adobe, for example, have got some AI tools that they've brought online that are really useful, and they've actually been quite careful about the information that they're feeding into their AI systems and how they train them to make sure that they're not utilizing copyright material, which seems like, that kind of seems obvious. It seems like you shouldn't just be able to chop everything up and feed it into your AI and say, oh look, we've created all this amazing stuff, because it's like, well, yeah, but did you get the rights of those people? Did you get the right to that author? Did you get the right to that artist? Yeah, it's so interesting, and I think what makes it more interesting is I know you've done a lot of like research for this, and there's some great sort of research that you found where the Pocket Pair are effectively talking about how great it is that they've hired very inexperienced people, they've hired some amateur people and people with no other professional experience in the areas they're working in, and often as you're reading these things, like often my brain goes to, how do you fill the gap between lack of experience and getting out a game like this? I'm like, AI does a great job of filling those gaps sometimes.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating, man. I think this could end up being extremely interesting if it does go to court, if Nintendo do sue them, and we get to the point where they start to take apart like models that have been created to develop AIs. It's cool. It's exciting.
Now that the Apple and Epic stuff is kind of mostly wrapped up, I feel like we do need a new courtroom drama, a video game edition in our lives. And like, while sometimes it doesn't seem like very Nintendo-like to go that kind of route, it is one of those things that, for as odd as it seems to say, if Palworld continues to build up momentum in any way, shape, or form, or even just maintains its current momentum, and reaches 10 million copies by the end of the week, let's say, I don't know how possible that is, but we're living in a world where we might have to entertain that kind of thinking. Then who knows who's going to be coming out of the woodwork, what's going to be revealed, how they're going to have to walk that back, if they can walk that back, like what will be done to eventually avoid court. Is it avoidable? Who's going to be taking them there? What's going to be at risk and at stake? So many fascinating outcomes. And as you just said, Jonesy, it's at times like these where people might look to Pocket Pair, the developer, for almost reassurance and hope to find a Japanese studio that, they hadn't heard of before, but that might have 1,000 employees and have been developing games for 50 years and have no reason to do any of this. But that is not what you find when you look at Pocket Pair. When you look at Pocket Pair, you find a self-described indie Japanese studio that, as we said, worked on that AI art imposter game where the central gimmick or the core mechanic of the game revolves around AI image generation. There's a game called Craftopia, which was built almost entirely, let's say mostly, using off-the-shelf assets that anyone can go and buy, and you only have to go and look at some images from that game, even images on Pocket Pair's own website, to see, there is no cohesive visual aesthetic between any of this, because they wanted a game that had a car and a hovercraft and a thingy, all these things in it at once. So they just downloaded assets regardless of whether or not they looked like they belonged in the same game. And then, Jonesy, you think about developers, whether or not they'd want to risk their reputation or their careers on, plagiarizing other materials, on so on and so forth. And so you start to look at who might be working on these games at an individual level. And yet we find out that Palworld was made by a mostly inexperienced team. Most of them were amateurs before being hired. Not my words, I will say. I think those are the words of Eurogamer. I don't know how I feel about calling people amateurs. Let's just say not professionals yet.
Not previously paid.
Yes. One team member, the CEO Mizobe claimed, was previously working at a convenience store before they got the job. There's talk about how 100 character concepts within Palworld were mostly made by a single graduate student. Quote, she was a graduate and had applied to nearly 100 companies, but failed them all, and now she is drawing most of the characters in Palworld. And again, there have been plenty of success stories about people who were rejected by whether it's educational institution or every company on planet Earth, and went on to be Steven fucking Spielberg. But when your CEO is going out there in a game that is really under the microscope for issues of plagiarism and AI generation and so on and so forth, and you say, we hired a graduate who 100 other companies had rejected, who had never worked at a video game studio before, and she made 100 character concepts for what is now the third highest concurrent player count in Steam history, and has sold 5 million copies. And it doesn't make sense. I will also note that they are also making a game called Nevergrave. And Jonesy, do you mind if we do a little bit of a live social experiment?
Go for it.
I've just sent you a link on Discord directly to the page for the Nevergrave section of the Pocket Pair website. Could you click on that and scroll down just a little bit until you start to get to the screenshots?
Yeah, I might. Is this going to mess? Oh no, hold on. If I do that, it's going to make me leave Discord, and then the people will lose your little face. So I'm going to
Oh, I
I'm
see.
gonna have to open another window. One sec. Let's have a
My
look.
apologies. All I'd like you to do when you get a second is open that page, scroll past the trailer until you get to the screenshots, and tell me what game you think you're looking at if you were to ignore the design of the player character.
Okay.
And I know what I people are just going to have to trust me that if
Oh,
Jonesy gets us off
what
the bat, yeah,
is that? Hollow Knight.
it's Hollow Knight. They're just making a Hollow Knight clone
It's a Hollow
with
Knight with a witch.
they've just replaced it with they put a witch in there. But like for anyone curious, pocketpair.jp is their website. If you're curious to go and see what Nevergrave is, it's not out yet. You can wishlist it on Steam. It ostensibly appears to be a game that in everything but name is just Hollow Knight.
That's
Um,
that's actually what's weird about what. No, I'm looking at it. I'm like, oh my god, that's Hollow Knight. But then I'm kind of thinking like, my nothing I'm looking at is like obviously right out of Hollow Knight, but everything about it it's like they've managed to somehow just capture the entire aesthetic and mechanics and movement, but just change the images, which is weird. As my brain is struggling to comprehend how it can
yeah.
look so
And
similar
then
without having the same
perhaps
elements.
if they looked at Hollow Knight and studied everything they could about that game's art direction and aesthetic, and perhaps used AI to generate assets that they did not have the personnel capable of generating themselves.
Right.
Like, I mean,
That's
I don't know.
mad,
It's a,
man.
all I know is I haven't even played Palworld, and I feel like mid to late January 2024, we've already been blessed with what could end up being one of the most fascinating stories of the entire year.
Yeah, like so. Yeah, if you're watching this live or if you're watching this after, did you say that? So yeah, pocketpair.jp. Go there and you can see what Jamie's
Yeah,
talking about. That is
yeah.
stark.
You can also, Jonesy, if you're still on that website, click on at the top, the links at the top, click on Craftopia,
Oh,
and
this is the one.
if you scroll to the very bottom and just look at the vehicle section and look at the disparity between the design aesthetics of that hovercraft, the Akira looking bike, like the weird like jungle temple image above it, like there's absolutely no attempt whatsoever to create a visual like a coherent visual style. They just pulled the assets that they could
But this,
afford. I
but
don't know.
okay, so this is the part where I think maybe I'll have a bit of an unpopular opinion, because I will say, like, when it comes to AI generation and when it comes to like generative tools in general, like not if it doesn't necessarily have to be like AI's creating everything, but you know you're using AI tools to help you generate some stuff. I don't mind that. Like I think the future is going to involve a lot of AI, a lot of generative stuff, where artists and VO artists and like video editors are going to use all of these tools to make better stuff, and game devs as well, and like with level design and things like that. I am not against any of that. I think it's just going to make stuff better. And I also don't like the argument sometimes that that we, you know, that it's not fair on the on people that create that art currently, because what are they going to do? Because then you could just get back to the argument of like, well, where were you when they were removing the checkouts from Tesco and Sainsbury's, like, you know, when they automated that industry? You can have this really reductive like argument which goes back and back and back. I do think though it should be artists working with AI to make better stuff as opposed to replacing it wholesale. And I think this is what you, and we don't know, this is me just guessing, but I think this is what you get when you don't involve the artist at all, and you just try and use the AI and you try and go the easy route. Whereas, because AI with someone who's got an eye for design and, you know, an artist, an illustrator, an animator, you could end up with some phenomenal stuff, and quickly as well. Like they'll be able to,
Oh yeah,
it'll accelerate their work process, it will accelerate their work patterns.
I don't know if you feel the same way, but as someone who regularly works within the Adobe suite, like, as we both do, people out there will already be well aware of one of the biggest determining factors of whether or not people are scared of a certain update or improvement within a lot of software is whether or not the term AI is even used. Half
Right.
the time, there are things that could call themselves AI but don't, but fundamentally are still built on the same like ideas of, hey, we're going to automate something for you because we're smarter than you are at this point, and you let them do it. When After Effects improve their like automatic rotoscoping tools, you don't sit there and going, I really should be drawing these rotors. I really should be rotoscoping by hand, frame by frame at this point. You let it do it.
I use generative AI today in Photoshop to remove logos from actually from AI generated images that we were gonna use as just like a fun little game of, we've asked AI um, to give us a futuristic version of this product. Can you tell what the original product is? And it's just a bit of fun, and it's not like there's no money being made of blah blah anything like that. But we wouldn't pay somebody to go and do that had we not done it with AI. We just wouldn't have done it. We would just had another idea, because it's literally one of those sorts of things. But then similarly, like I've used. Actually, funnily enough, if you're listening to this on podcasting platforms after the fact, chances are there's been some AI audio enhancement done to this through the Adobe suite as well, because we do that now after the fact with our audio only side of this. But I come back to the thing of, it's a hell of a lot better, I think, that me and you, Jamie, is sitting here and record this, and then we use AI to enhance audio for clarity, as opposed to AI audio voices that have been completely generated from scratch, which I think is different.
Or like if we had a video pipeline and we were working within Premiere and we had, let's say, multiple cameras and multiple audio sources, as many podcasts do. As it is, we just basically stream this and then upload the audio version on its own elsewhere. But if we did have a more like broad scale video and audio kind of like workflow, and we told people that we let Premiere automatically sync audio that was captured from a separate source with our video, and we let Premiere automatically add cuts like or we let Premiere automatically cut between cameras based off who's talking, things that that no one would bat an eyelid, that we were that we as quote unquote artists were letting software do things that we are used to being able to do by now, because we haven't called it AI and we haven't called it scary, and because people aren't worried about us not doing something we can do and letting a piece of software do it faster. Again, because it's like, I know, yes, either of us could cut between your camera and my camera if we were editing this in Premiere. But if Adobe wants to do it for us and we're happy to vet the results and sign off on them, then no one's getting hurt. Which is why that I think that we should be wary of like completely blocking off all ways in which AI can be used as a tool by artists to improve or speed up workflows and so on and so forth. We have to be cautious with everything, but I broadly speaking agree with what you're saying, that there doesn't need to be quite as much. I think a lot of the causes that people are really fighting for on social media often are valid, and I guess I commend them for caring as much as they do about artists' rights and so on and so forth, and making sure that artists remain relevant and are being paid for their work. And the more and more pieces of official art that are released on social media by massive companies, whether they're game developers or film studios or whoever it is, like when companies like Xbox and Magic the Gathering and people like that are like doing a holiday post with a piece of AI generated Christmas art, and you're like, that's one less artist with money in their pocket. I do think that there are cautionary conversations to be had there. But not to the extent that chokeholds letting AI do everything that it could do to aid the artist in the long run.
No, I agree. Like, I always come back to the idea that AI can't actually generate anything new. It can it can rejig, like, and this goes for images, this goes for words, this goes for VO. It can rejig something so it appears to be novel, but it actually can't create anything. And the only way you can create anything from genuinely create anything brand new is by using human artists to do it. Obviously, as the AI stuff gets better at rejigging, I think the number of companies that will use it will get bigger, because they don't need, or they won't necessarily want to spend the money on a limited number of very able people that can do that stuff. But then the weird thing is, like, as we've worked in this industry, like video and not necessarily gaming, but like the video side of it, we've just seen the industry expand. Like, I haven't seen people lose their jobs. I've just seen more companies do more stuff, and the people with the humans in it just do better stuff, like with more abilities.
It is a bit depressing when you look at certain industries that, like are aware, it does feel like job security is on a downward trend, and there are large numbers of layoffs, and at least the sentiment is, if you kind of poll or survey employees, that they feel like their jobs are more at risk than ever before. And when you look at the open positions on some of those companies' websites, they're like, what's the job role where they want people who are just really good at making commands for
Oh,
AI?
prompt writers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's like, Jesus, like, my job's on the line, and you've got 120K a year to spare for a prompt writer. Is this really what we're doing? Like, that stuff scares me a little bit.
I said that, and then I immediately regretted it, because then I just thought about all the people working in gaming who will lose their jobs because they can get an AI to design or code something, and I was like, okay, that's a stupid thing to say, because that's because that's not like creative. That's creative in a different way, right? Writing code is something AI is very good at, or is not as good yet, but will get very good at probably in the near future. So that will.
Yeah. Or, again, even if all AI ends up doing is enables the average coder to work 75% faster or 82% more efficiently, even that like reduces the number of positions needed to maintain the same level of quality of work.
Right. And
You know what I mean?
yeah, and in a weird way, there's a possibility. No, I hesitate, because I know how like companies and execs can be when it comes to just being like money grubbing and not putting their staff first sometimes. But there's a little part of me which is hopeful that maybe when it comes to things like crunch and stuff, it could alleviate some of that, because that is directly related to time spent. And so maybe it could help with something like that. But I don't know, man. It's such an up in the air. It's so weird at the moment. Like, yeah, it's a weird one for me as well, because like this is a bit like random, but so like, and people know I've talked about it before, but like, so my dad's a commercial airline pilot, and I've spoken to him for years about the fact that planes can be flown completely by computer, like from start to finish. And I've sort of said to him years and years ago, it's going to go back like 20 years. I sort of said, do you think within the time that you're a pilot, you'll see a day when there'll be no people in the cockpit? There'll just be a systems person like checking the machines, making sure they're running all right. And he was like,
Yeah.
he basically was like, his opinion was no, because people will not allow computers to completely take over, because they won't like it. And to be fair, he's been right for 20 years. I thought it would happen a lot quicker, and it hasn't. And he, he's still a pilot, and there are still two dudes flying that, or two women or whatever, or a man or a woman flying that plane. There's not just a computer sat there like.
Yep.
So hey,
When I first set foot in a car that does not have a person sat in the driver's seat, my arsehole will be puckered so tight for the entirety of that ride that like it might not return to its original shape ever again.
I'll just be thinking iRobot. That the AI is going to turn on me and try and like kill me or do something horrible.
Well, in iRobot, it wasn't even necessarily that it turned on him. It was that it saved the human who had the higher chance of survival, right? And he resented that.
No. In iRobot, I was thinking about when he's trying to find out what's going on, and the AI basically turns all the robots against him, and then he's just like having to fight off all these crazy robots.
Do you remember the reason that he's got like a grudge against robots to begin with is because he was in a car crash, and the robot was like first to the scene, and they were like the car had been crashed in the water, and the robot assessed the survival chances of each of him and this young girl, was it? And basically said the one I've got the higher, if I can only save one, the one I've got the higher chance of saving is Will Smith. So it saved Will Smith, and Will Smith was like, "Fuck you, you shouldn't have saved me."
Yes, that is. Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, because that is the difference between how a computer and a like if in a situation I had to save a dude in his 30s or an 8-year-old girl, like I'm saving the 8-year-old girl.
Exactly.
If someone said to me, but she's got less of a chance, I'll be like, she's an 8-year-old kid, man. Like that, she's getting saved.
Right, yeah.
Oh, exactly. But the other one's Will Smith. Tough. If he'd have left Jada, I would have thought again, but no.
Oh, Jonesy, do me a favor and keep his wife's name out your fucking mouth. Well, I mean, not to put you on the spot, Mr. Jones, but we've been going for what, about an hour 45, an hour 50?
Oh yeah, we have. Blimey, yeah.
I feel like we might have a podcast on our hands here if you're happy to call it there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That was a good. We went a little bit off the sidelines of the AI thing, but I think it was relevant. So yeah.
Yeah, I feel like, but this was a week where, yes, I will concede we did maybe go off-piste a little bit. We're getting caught up in the intricacies of whether or not Indy's whip actually looked weird and what the future of AI could mean for the games industry and beyond. But at least those conversations were grounded in, like I said, two relatively hip hop and happening pieces of news from around the industry this week. And I feel like we're not going to be extending that same luxury every episode this year. So make hay when the sun shines, right?
Absolutely. Am I allowed to do something very social media-y and do a poll on X about whether the whip looks weird? Do you think that's all right to write?
I will absolutely sign off on that. I think you are more than within your right to do a poll, a whip poll. So if you're
I'll do a
listening
GIF.
to this,
I'll find a good GIF of the whip, and I'll put it on the post and see if people think it actually looks weird or if they think it looks all right. So yeah, if you keep your eyes peeled for that.
Yeah, if you're listening to this or watching this at any point, actually, I don't know how. Can you choose how long a poll stays open for?
You can.
I get you. What do we give it? A handful of days, or do you want results sooner?
No, I think a few days. Yeah, you got to give people time to have a look.
Okay.
Yeah.
There you go. So if you've tuned into this podcast within the first couple of days of it hitting the internet, then head over to @SuperShowPod on Twitter. Keep an eye out for Jonesy's poll and let us know and Jonesy know whether or not you think it looks janky or whether or not you think it looks... Well, I don't know what the other options are going to be, actually. I'm not going to put words in Jonesy's mouth. He's going to think about the things you will get to choose from. You'll have to find the poll yourself to see what they are. I look forward to seeing the results, Jonesy, just as much as I look forward to podcasting with you every week because you are such a delight. So thank you for offering your insight and expertise once again on these range of topics that we've gone over in the past hour 45.
Thank you, mate. Thank you for hosting. And as you requested before we went live, I will bring over my leather chaps and my bullwhip, and we will have a good old practice.
Hey, wow, it wasn't meant to be... We'll talk after this. Thank you all so much for watching and or listening, whether you're with us on YouTube, whether you're watching us live right now and you're still in the chat, in which case, hello, and I guess also goodbye. Or whether you're listening on a podcasting platform, whether you're listening the week that all this news happened, or whether you're listening years in the future. I can see you there in 2029. I know who you are. I don't know why you're still listening to this, but you are, and we thank you. And hopefully... we will see you here, same place, same time next week for more gaming goodness. But for now, we'll leave you with Sting and a cut off his new album. Take it away.
See ya.